1753. After all, that charter defined most of the boundaries of the town that still exists today. Because that charter was for, it wasn't 29,000 acres, it was 23,000 acres. If you look at the outline of black outline in the map with all the ends and the dates on it, you'll see right going through the Y of unity a checkered line. That was basically the outline under the Buckingham. I think the Kingston Hempstead was additions in where the 64 is, which is put 53. It wasn't exactly the same charter. It was one of many in 53 or 54 along the border and along the river. There were about 30 of them or so that were given out in the 50s, in the 1750s, and that was a product of a very astute, politically wise governor of New Hampshire named Benjamin Wentworth. Among other things, he kept his governorship 25 years, longer than any other colonial governor. He was very skilled in telling the people in England what they wanted to hear. They were notorious, New Hampshire was, for cutting down the royal pine, and they asked him whether there was any smuggling in New Hampshire. And he said, no, of course there's not any. I built my house right on the mouth of the river where it would come. I can see them. They wouldn't dare smuggling. Well, there's this floor in his house. This is the Wentworth Coolidge house down in Portsmouth. Had wide boards, and he just knew how to lie through his teeth. And he didn't have any Gentians around to call you to account. 3,000 miles there, communication is as long as things were going well. And Wentworth was quite popular, among other reasons, because he gave away so much land that he was very successful as a governor. And one of his ways of getting success was by naming towns granted after English officials. I'd like to have people like that in the audience. I know somebody's listening. But, for example, all the 4 initial counties in New Hampshire were named after members of the Privy Council. Cheshire, Grafton, Guilsborough, Stratford, Merrimack comes later, Sullivan comes later. So that, and you get lots of towns like Wolfboro after Boston, there's also including Buckingham and Rockingham, which is right across. So that was one of the way, and that was necessary in New Hampshire because the reason that Great Britain created New Hampshire was to create a colony that, I'm a colonial historian by training, we call a royal colony, namely the governors appointed in England, the councils appointed in England, rather than a charter colony, which Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island were. They appoint their own government. So New Hampshire was a royal colony, and then if you're going to stay in, you've got to butter up folks in England. See, and that dictates a lot of place names here. The Buckingham Charter was that. The size, I think I've already said this, but the size of the original one, which is more like a square, the western 2/3 of what is Unity now, was for 23,000 acres. There was, the contents of the charter were in some ways very important for what happened afterwards. Many boundaries were set, but what the charters for New England towns were charter for Unity? Ah, we've got one. Well, up in Haverhill, when I did this talk up here, they had a public reading of the charter. And somebody came up and I was giving a talk there and said, well, what the hell is that all about? And it turns out that those are legal documents from England, how towns were created in England, which were different than towns in New England. Because that's why in the charter, there allows you to hold, after you get 50 families, a fair. And they didn't have anything to do with organic food or anything like that fairs today. It was because they were market centers in an economy which was much more centralized authority in Great Britain. So those are still, as it goes in these charters, they tell you you've got to create a center of population center in the geographical center of the town where all the settlers have got 1 acre plus. Well, nobody ever did that. You tried, but nobody did that. But it did set boundaries. And very important in the way New Hampshire was different from Massachusetts, it gave you the right to govern once you got the grant of land. Unlike in Massachusetts, you had to apply for what was called incorporation later on, once the population had done it. So Hanover, for example, the group of names listed in the charter, about 60 of them, they have a meeting. They're called town proprietors. They get grants of land. Most towns have a map. I couldn't find one for Unity that shows the divisions within the town of that. These town proprietors meet. They hire surveyors to divide the land up, and in the case of Hanover, then everyone went out and had a drink or something because they were always meeting in taverns, and came back and met as the town, and elected moderators and selectmen. The moderator was usually, the first moderator was named in the charter. So that they established government and they established boundaries. That's what the charters do, and that's why they're the same today. Because the system of government is affected by law. It's something to do. This is boundaries. Your boundaries have been a few corners nicked off by over time, but are pretty much the same as it was in the charter of 64. This one in 53, no effort was made by the proprietors, those are the ones that are listed in the charter itself, to get things started. One, there was a bad gamble in the beginning. There just wasn't enough pressure from the outside to fill these up and have people wanting to move in and start to cut down the trees and do what you had to do to get a community. But there was also, and I put the narrative of this underneath the geography, 53 and 54, New Hampshire grants for Connecticut River Valley towns, including Buckingham. And then there's what we call the 7 Years' War, the last of 4 so-called French and Indian wars. They're not just the French that had Indians, the Iroquois and others were allied with the English. But those wars lasted through 61. So it would have been impossible, basically, to get settled in Unity when it was, or Buckingham. It would have been impossible to do that because of the dangers of Indian attacks. Charleston was as far as any settlement came until the 1760s. The logic, which may interest you, of Fort number 4 is that was the 4th town granted by Massachusetts. You go back to the other side. If you take the New Hampshire definition, Hinsdale was in Massachusetts, but Chesterfield, Westmoreland, Walpole, and Charleston. They were number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4 in the Massachusetts grant up the Connecticut River, which is where that 4th number 4 moniker comes from. And one good sign of the effort of none of the proprietors in the 53 charter ever making any effort is none of their names are repeated in the 64 charter. They didn't fulfill the requirements, they didn't make any effort, so that New Hampshire felt no obligation to include them in the granting of land. I went through both charters, tried to find a similar name, and except for Theodore Atkinson, who was the secretary of the province and Wentworth's son-in-law, then it didn't make any, there was no overlap on that. So, the Buckingham Charter of 53 was not worth celebrating. And you wise, no, maybe you did, but you were wise to save your major effort for